You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Seravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome to episode 47 of the DFO Rundown. We really should call this one 47 Expansion Ideas because we're going to get into lots of them on the show today. I'm Jason Gregor. Frank Seravalli, of course, joins me once again. We are live from the woodjerseys.com studio. Frank has his very intricate Toronto Maple Leafs wood jersey. Looks awesome up close, or you'll see my Boston one from afar. You can hang it up on your wall, at your home, in your office. It's fantastic. All the teams, Seattle Kraken fans, trust me, they're getting Kraken on having one right now coming up. It'll be ready for the new season. So check it out. All the teams, your favorite teams at woodjerseys.com.
Let's get Kraken.
Yes. Now, before we get to our expansion draft episode, are you doing okay? I know this is a great weekend for Frank Seravalli breaking stories, but I hear that your son kind of followed in the footsteps of his father, breaking some important things.
Yeah, that ain't right. Why'd you have to bring that up? Yeah, it's been a day. You know, I was like kind of chained to my desk in my office, making a bunch of calls all day, and I come out, we're ready to go to dinner as a family, and my wife's like, yeah, Christian has something to say. And I was like, oh, this will be good. And he's 7. He's like, Dad, I'm really sorry. I broke your TV. And I'm like, you what? Like, we just got our basement finished recently, get a brand new 80-inch TV hanging on the wall. So excited. I've barely spent any time down here. And yeah, he was playing Nintendo Switch with his buddy and the controller flew out of his hand. And I say that with air quotes, because he was probably, if he's anything like me, he raged through it at the TV and said that it was an accident. Jeez. And so there's a big, circle and like the spider cracks coming out of it, and now it just won't turn on. And I'm like, pretty sure that's not covered under warranty.
Oh, that's jeez. I didn't know 80-incher. Wow, you're living large there. I like it.
I was like, look, if you're going to get the basement finished and make it nice, like you only do it once, like let's not have to do this again later. So wow. I got to do it again later.
Something tells me the controller won't be slipping out of his hands again anytime soon.
Something tells me that he will never be playing video games on a TV in my basement again.
Now, what's great about video games is, you can play a video game and kind of get a sense of what it's like to be a player in that game. And so today,
what a segue that is.
We're going to have our kind of video.
It's almost like you've done this once or twice.
Yeah, once or twice. Sure. Our own video game version of the expansion draft, because of course, on Sunday, all of the protected lists came out, and now we see a lot of players that are exposed, and there's some big names. There's some big contracts exposed as well. And now Seattle will have until Wednesday to decide who they're going to claim from these teams. Are we going to see some deals right after, like we saw in 2017? And so today we'll go through the process, Frank. You drafted a team. I drafted a team as well. I just want to start by saying it was not as easy as I thought. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun. I got all the
It's a puzzle.
Through it. Oh my, it's a puzzle. And it's like, there's certain teams that have way more appealing players. So then you got to decide. And then there's others where
I called it I was trying to think of, Jason, my pile of shit award. That was like, which team did the best job of, or maybe not, because they just don't have any good players, of like, which team handed Ron Francis the biggest pile of shit to pick from. I think I know the answer to that, but let's get to the end of the exercise.
Okay. All right. That's a good little tease. I like it. What did you find the most challenging when you made your team?
Just steering away from the big names, the big contracts, the ones that are going to get you in trouble. I think there's two ways to look at this. I mean, if you really wanted to go for it and you're Seattle and you wanted to hit the ground running and try and chase a Stanley Cup, I actually think that there'd be a way to put together a team that is an instant playoff team. I just don't, when you hear Ron Francis's comments on Saturday about the primo value of cap space, and I think everyone believes that to be true. And the Golden Knights, I think they viewed it the same way, and then they realized quite quickly that their team was good. And so they kind of threw that out the window, and they've had a lot of cap issues since then because they've tried to compete for the Stanley Cup. I don't think Seattle's quite going to go down that same path. Obviously, they're going to end up with a decent team, and how weak the Pacific is They may actually be a playoff team when it's all said and done. There just isn't as much leverage to squeeze this time around, I don't think, because I think teams actually did end up learning a lesson. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, well, I have a little bit of a strategy and for mine as well. And maybe I can tell it at the end after we're going to go through team by team and who we picked. And, obviously some teams, there's other options. And sometimes you might, I know that I haven't seen your list. You haven't seen my team. So this is, we're doing this live and I'll be like, oh, that's who Frank picked.
By the way, when you say that's who Frank picked, I actually wanted to point this out for everyone listening. This is none of my opinion because first off, no one cares about my opinion. I went through the expansion draft, all 30 teams with 3 NHL front office members this afternoon to get a consensus on who they think will be picked. So this is actually more reporting. I'll have plenty of rumors and talk about side deals as we go through each team alphabetically, but none of this in here is my opinion.
Yeah, well, my team is based on conversations I had with people in the last 6 months, as well as, just some of those conversations were which players they like, and obviously there's some on the list that we didn't think would be exposed. So that, that kind of adds to it. Plus I went in knowing, having talked to many people on what they think is going to be the strategy of Seattle. So it's not, this isn't my team per se as who I like. Although there are some, I'll admit that I looked at Vegas and I saw the strength of what they did. And I think in hindsight, if there was two little things they could change, that's what I added to this team. So mine's kind of probably, yours is 100% with others.
Right.
Mine has, I would say 15.
It's a hybrid
% of where I'm like, this is what I would do if I was in that position.
Got it. Okay. So let's start with Anahiem. You go first.
We're going in alphabetical order.
Alphabetical order, right through the whole thing.
Okay. Derek Grant.
Okay. I thought about Derek Grant and I was told to check out which centers are potentially available for Seattle. And that was one of the real sticking points for Ron Francis, but I think they're going to go with the young defenseman, Jacob Larson.
Well, it's funny, Frank. That's the other guy I thought, but I had so many defensemen and it came down. It's funny. Those are my two
I actually
guys,
only ended up with 9. So Jacob Larson is one of the 9.
You had 9. Okay. I actually had 10 defensemen and I'll explain why, because I think defensemen are extremely valuable at the trade deadline. And I think Seattle's going to load up on them. And, if they are a playoff team, great. And it's probably because they have NHL defensemen. And if not, then they'll move some of them for futures. So
okay.
Arizona's now that was a tough team for me.
This is in the pile of shit category.
Yeah.
They're a contender.
Yeah, that's fair. Cause I ended up going and I felt for certain energy players, I went Tyler Pitlick.
I went with Tyler Pitlick as well. I thought about Christian Fischer, 5 years younger, under team control, 1 more year as an RFA. He was productive a couple years ago, has fallen off a little bit. But I think Pitlick is more of a sure thing, and the cap hit at 175 isn't damaging.
You got to go alphabetical because I don't have all the teams in front of me. I have all I think it's Boston next.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I got the whole thing in front of me.
Because I took a few that are a little bit risky.
Okay.
I'll admit, and this was one of them.
Okay.
I went with Nick Ritchie because I think he's a really good player. He's a guy who can play in your top 6 at times if you don't have, and he's a really good bottom 6 player. I know he's an RFA. There's a concern obviously that, if he goes to arbitration, he'll get a big hit, but I still think he was worth taking. So I went Nick Ritchie.
I could see that. Makes sense for a team that, is looking for some goals and a little bit of an edge. I think Nick Ritchie makes sense. I went with Jeremy Lauzon. It was between him and Connor Clifton. I think with Jay Leach being there, he would know these guys pretty well. Lauzon can also play the right side. He's 24, cap hit under $1 million, 1 more year. And when you look at the minutes that those two guys played last year, he actually was playing almost 19 minutes a night.
Yeah. And
a little bit more than Clifton. So that told me a little bit what Boston staff thought of him. So I went with Jeremy Lauzon.
All right.
Buffalo.
And we're going to have Tyler's going to build this as we're talking. He's going to put it up on screen for people. And, we'll have all pictures on social media if you want to follow along. The Buffalo Sabres, I went a little bit outside the box here, but this is a defenseman that I know many people really like. He only played 13 games last year, so maybe you forgot about him. The risk is, of course, he's a UFA, but Vegas took Eric England, who we had on the pod earlier, who was a UFA, and then signed him right away. I think Jake McCabe is somebody that you can sign for 4 years. The cap number isn't going to be outrageous. You know exactly what you get. I'm taking Jake McCabe.
I could see that. Buffalo was also on my list of teams that didn't offer up a lot.
Yep.
I had Will Borgen. Younger, under team control, low cap hit, has room to grow, just depth defenseman for your organization.
Next.
Calgary.
Mark Giordano, man. It's hard. I know he's got a big cap hit.
I think it's almost definitely Mark Giordano. In fact, I believe that Seattle has given Calgary an indication that they will indeed take Mark Giordano. So I think that's a really good fit for a lot of the reasons we've talked about. Leader, awesome in the community, has game quite clearly. The cap hit isn't so much so that you're like scared to death. And also the fact that it's only 1 year. I think he's the perfect guy to try and inject some culture and what you want this organization to be.
I believe, Frank, when they have the broadcast on Wednesday, that Mark Giordano will be there, because you still need, you got to make a little bit of a splash to your market. And Mark Giordano is a legit, the guy's a Norris Trophy winner. He's a good player. And I talked about this last week on the pod, an absolute gem of a human being.
And I don't think Calgary wants to lose him at all.
No,
I just think, they had to lose someone. They've got some younger defensemen. Obviously Giordano turns 38 and they don't want to be in a spot where they're left exposing one of those players who Seattle almost surely would take, in addition to the fact that, who's kidding who? If you're going to get $7 million off your cap, then that provides the Calgary Flames a lot of flexibility to fill that role with a younger player as they continue to look for change.
Who do you have in Carolina?
Carolina, I was all over the map. I was surprised to see Nino Niederreiter exposed. I think his production certainly warrants consideration. I am very intrigued. I think Seattle is all over Dougie Hamilton. I think Dougie Hamilton is 8x8 all day in Seattle. Okay. So I'm thinking that Seattle is going to take a hard run at signing Dougie Hamilton. Now, I don't know why, though, given that they know that they could, that they'd also then make him their selection. So this will come up at other points with regards to UFAs, but I have them selecting Jake Bean. So that's my official choice, but I think that they're going to sign Dougie Hamilton at some point. That's my bet.
Mine came down to Bean and Niederreiter, and I have a lot of other defensemen, and I just look at the one thing I felt that Vegas was looking for a lot is, and they still are, is just pure finishers. And there was a few out there that are the, better as legit scorers. And I think Nino Niederreiter is that guy can score you 20 goals, and it's only 1 year in his contract. So we'll see. Some guys don't accept change very well, but I went with Nino Niederreiter only because I believe I think Seattle wants to be somewhat competitive. And in order to be competitive, you got to have some guys who can score.
Yeah, no, I think he definitely warrants consideration and something for them to think about. I think that's actually why he's in there, is so that they give them something to think about instead of Jake Bean, who I think they like. Chicago?
The Chicago Blackhawks, this is an interesting one for me. And I'll admit, I had about 4 or 5 picks that I felt were kind of risky picks. And this is one of them. Because he's an RFA, and I know I've heard, some of the numbers he's looking for, maybe a little bit higher, but Nikita Zadorov is a big defenseman, and, size matters on the back end. And if you could get him for, kind of close to what he made last year, because he didn't put up any numbers that command a massive arbitration case that I see. So I went with Nikita Zadorov because I just think he's a guy that would relish being in that expansion and having the opportunity to be there from the start.
I think 3 out of 3 of the people I talked to, they're all 100% convinced that that's the guy Seattle's taking. So that was easy. Colorado, not easy.
Oh man, they got a lot of options in Colorado, but I went for a guy who he's obviously got some. He's got some term. It's a little bit, a little bit heavier of a contract, but Jonas Donskoy, I like. He can play in your top 6. He can play in your third line. He can do a lot. He's a very versatile player. And I think Ron Francis, the style of game they want to play, I think Jonas Donskoi fits right into it.
I initially had Jonas Donskoi on based on how I think it might go, but the people I've talked to all seem to indicate that it's JT Compher. And the reason for that is because he can play center.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because those were the two guys I was
so he's younger than Donskoi. He's 3 years younger. His cap hit is a little less, and they think he's a center. So that's where I think they're going to go.
Yeah. I always say this, though. When I hear people say they think he's a center, I'm like, I'm not sure he's a center.
Does that make you think of Nuge at all? Too soon?
Yeah. Okay. Like some guys can play center. Are they necessarily better on the wing?
Yeah. I think we could have that debate. We could do an entire episode on that.
Yeah, those are pretty close, but I agree with you. The age was I almost put Compher down because of that, but people are really high on Donskoi. Scouts love the way he played.
I really like Donskoi, and he's been a playoff player too.
Yeah.
Columbus.
Well, this one, Frank, this would be a tough one. I know that they have Max Domi. I had a lot of guys with cap space, and because of the injury, I don't think it. This one's a little bit of a wild card, but I had two different scouts tell me that they think this guy can pan out with patience. Young defenseman who they don't have a lot of on my team, and I'm going with Gabriel Carlson.
Interesting. Okay, I've got another defenseman that a bunch of people mentioned. That's Dean Kukin. I think he's a guy that, for whatever reason, hadn't necessarily gotten the minutes or the ton of opportunity in the lineup, but someone that people think can do more.
Well, hey, that happened last time to a Columbus player when he went to the expansion Vegas Golden Knights. So maybe that'll happen again.
Okay, Dallas. I struggled a lot with Dallas.
Yeah, I went with the veteran guy in Dallas and Blake Como.
So did I. That's interesting. I just think his production is consistent. He brings some leadership, and at $2.4 million, he's not going to crush you, and it's only for 1 year. Again, same thing, same vein of thinking with Mark Giordano is to help build and establish set the tone of the culture that you want to build in that group. And I think Blake Como would be another guy to fit that category.
Best definition I got from Blake Como is coaches love him because you know what you're going to get from Blake Como every night. And that's really valuable, Frank. Even if all he gives you is a 6 out of 10 every night, but you know that's what you get. Coaches,
you're going to get 8-10 goals guaranteed. Yes. Easy.
Yeah, they love predictability.
And he shows up. Okay, Detroit.
The Detroit Red Wings. Well, I'll be honest, I was a little surprised I saw his name on here, but man, I loved the season he had. I think you need some dynamic players, and I'm going with Troy Stecher.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm a Troy Stecher fan. I was actually surprised he ended up in Detroit when he hit free agency. I'm going with Vladislav Namestnikov. He's a guy that has hit 20 goals previously, had an okay year, still played 16 minutes a night, cheap contract. Again, no risk. My whole thing with this entire exercise from the people I've talked to is don't get locked in long-term with anyone. And Vladislav Namestnikov, another guy, come in, prove it, chip on your shoulder, hasn't gotten, that opportunity to really stay and build his career somewhere. Can it be in Seattle?
I only have 11 players, Frank, that have a contract longer than 1 year, like 2 years or longer. So I agree with you on that. My one concern about Namestnikov, his production when he was in Tampa was obviously the best. And he played some pretty skilled players. And since then, I'm not sure. And I don't think Namestnikov.
He had a 17-goal season 2 years ago, split between the Sens and Avs. So, I mean, the Sens, he scored 13 goals in 54 games with the Sens. Yeah. I mean, that's where the production came.
Yeah, yeah.
How about the Edmonton Oilers?
Now, this one is an interesting one to me because there's not a player that Edmonton's going to lose. I think that's really damaging to their team. And I went with and this pick came down to, for me, because they were probably one of my last 7 or 8 teams I filled out. So I was getting down to positional need a little bit. I went with a veteran player that coaches know what they get in Chris Russell, who has a very low cap hit of $1.25 million. I get he's older, but the only young player they really had available would have been Tyler Benson. And he hasn't established himself as an NHL player yet. I thought about Jujhar Khaira as a real outside chance, but I ultimately chose the guy who coaches know he's a third pair. He can play either side. He kills penalties and blocks shots like no one else, and he's dirt cheap.
This was a pretty strong consensus for Jujhar Khaira. A number of different reasons. He brings some energy. He's got some size. The other guy that people talked about, as you hit on, was Benson. Some people were saying that they think Benson can be that sort of Thomas Nosek guy, where you bet on a prospect who hadn't really gotten a chance in the NHL yet, like Vegas did a few years back. I think Khaira's a little bit more of a sure bet, and I think I'm going to make a prospect bet later, but it's not going to be in Edmonton.
Yeah, I'm curious.
And by the way, before we move on, there's been lots of chatter out there about the Edmonton Oilers and their defense. And from my understanding, and this is Sunday night, this pod will be posted on Monday morning. My understanding is that the Oilers and Adam Larsson are rather unlikely at this point to get something done, and that he'll be heading to market.
Yeah.
Now, I think the development, which is really interesting, is that Tyson Barrie has a real chance to stay in Edmonton. That's been the sort of shift that's occurred over the last 4 or 5 days. And I think it's really interesting for a number of reasons. I think a lot of people had written off Tyson Barrie and the chance to come back just because of whatever number he may or may not be looking for. And I think he actually really enjoyed his time in Edmonton, wants to come back, and also sees how good of a fit it was. So why change it? And I think that both sides are open to the idea. The question is, how does the pecking order go around the league? Where does Dougie Hamilton go? How much does he sign for? All those things kind of, go into it. But Tyson Barrie, I think, has a real strong chance to stay.
Yeah. The challenge about that for Edmonton is you have Barrie, Bouchard, and Bear then on your right side. And none of them are guys that I think you want playing the tough minutes that an Adam Larsson played. Adam Larsson had tons of defensive zone starts, right? He's a big body. He doesn't have the polish of those three with the puck, but he's infinitely better defensively than all three of them. And if you're going to run that as your right side, man, you're going to need three bigger physical bodies on the left side. So you've got Keith and Nurse. So if Barry's back, then I'm guessing Bear is going to play with Keith under this scenario. And then Evan Bouchard slots in to start. But yeah, that would be interesting, Frank. I know it's being talked about.
People thought it was a foregone conclusion that Tyson Barrie was gone. And in some ways, because that was the narrative, I did too, until I started making calls late in the week. And I want to throw one other thing at you. I think there's been some interest from some teams in Zach Kassian. And I think it's a possibility that he ends up being on the move when the trade freeze is lifted.
Ooh, well, that'll make Oilers fans excited, because many of them were upset that he wasn't exposed. And I try to tell people, you're not exposing Zach Kassian.
You don't expose players that there's interest in, and that there's interest in it. Like, look at, I made this point on Twitter earlier today. Look at the Anaheim Ducks. They protected Nicolas Deslauriers. The reason for that over a guy like Derek Grant, who you selected, is because they know that there's teams that are interested in him. So he's easy to move, and that's a signal to me that they likely will be moving him.
Yes, that makes sense. Let's get to Florida.
Florida was an interesting one. And here's a little tidbit for you. Everyone thinks that Chris Driedger is on his way to Seattle, and I'm certainly not disputing that in any way. I think this is part of a side deal because, if not, why would you, they're not just going to take Chris Driedger off your hands for nothing. They can get him as a free agent and sign him. So I think part of the side deal is that Seattle takes Frank Vatrano as their official selection, and there's some, or either that or Chris Driedger is the official selection, and Florida has signed him to a deal beforehand, and Frank Vatrano also goes along with. Either one of those guys is going to be the selection, and the other one's going to go with. That's at least what I had heard as a rumbling on Sunday night.
Okay, well, that's a Florida. I found was the most challenging team for me to fill out a roster, and so I went Frank with a complete massive wild card. I was just filling out the roster, and Vatrano was one, and I felt like I had too many forwards, so I went with a defenseman.
Marcus Notivara?
No, I actually went with Brady Keeper, which is is a massive. It's a little bit of a reach, but I felt like Brady Keeper was a guy who 2 years ago got some traction in Florida.
It was an awesome story.
Yeah. And so I went with a little bit of an emotional pick. I think
I wrote that story about his path from,
100%.
First Nations to the University of
Yes.
Maine, and how he just, had such a tough time there, almost left school and played through it. And honestly, I've kept close tabs on Brady Keeper because of that story.
And Frank, you're drafting 30 players. Some of these guys got to be in the American League on your franchise.
Not only that, but look at how many guys from Vegas they never even tried to sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to say that they won't, but
yeah,
they never did.
Yeah. So that was the one pick that I didn't get I didn't get a good feel from anyone, because Dreger, I've heard those rumblings too about Chris Dreger, and that makes sense. But I've always been like you'd mentioned earlier with Dougie Hamilton. If you're that confident you can sign the player, why wouldn't you draft someone else from that organization?
Mm-hmm. The Los Angeles Kings.
You know what's funny about the Kings is they have a lot of really good young prospects, but here's a player, Frank, that I looked at a little bit of the success of Vegas, and I think this player fits into an energy role extremely well in Brendan Lemieux.
Okay. I could see that. I picked Kale Clegg on defense, 23, still, 761,000 RFA, under team control, saw him play at 2 World Juniors, think there's more there, has had a decent run in the AHL and got a little taste with the Kings, but, I think he's a guy that makes a lot of sense. That leaves us the Minnesota Wild. And by the way, before you do that, just want to give a shout out to Roasty Coffee, roasty.ca, as I take a sip here. Powered me through the entire weekend. We got to talk to Andrew Hayes at a certain point. Former Brandon Wheat King starts up a coffee company. Be a great guest.
Well, we might have to ask Andrew. Like, Frank, for me, I just have water in mind right now.
I need an emergency shipment of coffee down here.
I'm guessing you might have after it happened with the 80-inch TV, you might have had to spike yours with a little bit of cooling juice tonight.
Yeah, well, between so I had a wedding on Saturday night, and needed like 4 cups of coffee this morning to get rolling before the lists were out there, and then another couple to get me through the night. So roasty.ca, that's my shout out.
Okay.
Who are you taking in mini?
Carson Soucy.
Okay, I could see Carson Soucy, and I think that makes some sense, and I think that makes the Wild a little nervous. But I'm taking goaltender Capo Kakkonen. And you talked about him last week on the pod, so I don't need to extol to you the virtues as to why they would.
Oh, yeah. You know what? It's funny because I had 2 young goalies, and I think that ultimately you got to take a young goalie for sure. And now Kakkonen, I'm pretty sure, doesn't require waivers. Correct?
I'm not sure. Maybe not yet.
I thought he didn't, which is why that's important, Frank, because if you've got 2 other goaltenders,
you're going to waive him right away. What's the point? He's waiver exempt. That's a great point.
Yeah. So that was
good thought by you.
That's one that makes it. Then you can keep developing just in case you have other 2 good goaltenders. So I think that's key. Now I went with Soucy only because I think, there's lots to like about Carson Soucy. He's a 2.75 cap hit, big body. He's got an absolute bomb of a shot. And just looking kind of how they're going to formulate their type of defense, I think he's a guy that fits in there. And I know that Minnesota likes him, right? Like you like him. Sometimes I chuckle when people, he's only a 3rd pair defenseman. If you're a solid 3rd pair defenseman in the NHL,
ask the Montreal Canadiens. They couldn't find one.
Exactly. Your value is extremely important.
Speaking of the Montreal Canadiens, the most interesting team, I think, maybe aside, I'm not going to say by far, the Tampa Bay Lightning are really interesting. So I reported earlier today about Carey Price and his injury situation, and some would say really curious timing. How it worked out. He ended up going to the Habs this week. He had an MRI. He's had some discomfort in both his hip and his knee. And he just said, look, with the uncertainty around my health situation, no one has an idea from the doctors yet how long he's going to be out. It's definitely going to be a bit. Is it 8 weeks? Is it the entire regular season? Is it the entire season? So he's heading down to New York next week, this week actually, to get further examination by an expert. And the problem is they won't know until Friday. Well, the expansion draft is on Wednesday. So Seattle has had a chance now to go through his medical records. They have the opportunity to look at the medical records of every player who's made available. And my understanding is that it's sort of really clouded the picture here. Seattle wasn't expecting Carey Price to be available. They had their eyes on Jake Allen the entire time, so much so that Montreal knew it, and they were trying on Saturday to move Jake Allen. So the fact that they were trying to move Jake Allen, but also had Carey Price's no move waiver in their back pocket, it makes me wonder how seriously injured is he? Is this information coming out because they're trying to dissuade Seattle from taking Carey Price, who has, obviously some family roots and spends his off seasons in Washington State. I think his wife is from Tri-Cities. It's all really interesting. And for all those reasons, I don't see Seattle taking Carey Price. So who you got?
Oh, I got Carey Price.
Okay.
And now here's why. I'll be honest. I didn't see a report because I was with my son all day today, so I didn't see that one report on Carey Price, and obviously that would change my opinion. But I'll say this: you were bang on about his wife from Tri-Cities. Carey Price has also talked about his love of growing up by the water. He loved it, and as a farm guy myself, when we purchased our house and we have a lake behind it, it's hard to explain that feeling of just being somewhere where you're comfortable. And I look at Carey Price, he's 34 years of age. So was Marc-Andre Fleury. And when Marc-Andre Fleury got picked up by Vegas, there'd been some concerns. Well, Fleury, is he the same goalie as he was before? And I know that Carey Price's last few regular seasons, Frank, have not been good. The playoffs was unbelievable. But I look at Seattle, and one of the main reasons why Vegas has been successful is because of Marc-Andre Fleury. It's extremely important position. And
this is a huge dare by the Montreal Canadiens. Basically, what you're saying is, hey guys, we're putting the best goaltender available in the expansion draft. So good luck, Ron Francis, explaining to your marketplace why you didn't select him. And you can't tell us that it's because of the cap, because you have no cap issues.
Thank you.
So that's the bet. And that's exactly the pressure point that Mark Bergevin is squeezing. He was able to keep Jake Allen. And in this case, Carey Price is the guy who, according to my sources, stepped up and said, if I'm going to be out, I can't be out. And you also lost Jake Allen. Caden Primo, everyone knows that he's going to be something special, but he can't carry the load and help this team get in the playoffs in a murderous division with that kind of start and that kind of pressure heaped on him, especially without Shea Weber. So that's the sort of calculus. Now, does Seattle buy into it? That's the thing. Or do they push back against the injury and say, look, we're going to go in a different direction?
You're right, Frank. It's a risk. It's one that in today's NHL, without a goaltender, it's extremely difficult. And
it's a $44.25 million gamble.
Hey,
that's what it is.
Hey, you know what? I was told by numerous people in other franchises that Seattle wants to be competitive. Their owner is planning on spending right to the cap.
No one's questioning that. I think they are going to spend, but I just don't know that it's going to be with Carey Price.
And that's totally valid. But I decided it's rare that you can have that opportunity to get pedigree. And so maybe he's injured, Frank, but man, he just played unreal.
That's what the Tampa Bay players were telling me about Shea Weber. They said, you're going to tell me that guy's hurt? I just saw how good he was in the Cup final.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So I think they're going to pass on Carey Price when it's all said and done.
Who are they taking?
I think they're going to sign Philip Danault.
Oh, dude. Wow. Yeah. Hey. So they're gonna do the England with him. They're gonna take him and then announce it. That would be a big one.
I think that would make a lot of sense for a team that is to my understanding, not upset, but is hankering for the center position, and they don't feel like they've gotten it in this draft. Philip Danault is your guy. He just is.
All right.
Let's go to the Nashville Predators.
The Nashville Predators, when, another team there's nobody that, like, I'm not taking Matt Duchene. I saw him and Johansson.
You're not taking Johansson?
No, well, if I was going to take one of the two, it would have been Matt Duchene over Ryan.
They protected 5 defensemen, so they got no one there.
No, I'm just trying to look at my list of trying to even think who my Nashville player is.
I took Calle Jarnkrok. I thought about Nick Cousins, but I'm not confident, but I think Calle Jarnkrok is a good fit, and he's 1 year, $2 million. Again, under 30. There's no threat.
Oh yeah, this is my one.
I could see if they wanted to sign Mikael Granlund as well. I don't know why you would use your pick on him.
This is my one outlier pick, Frank.
Okay.
Because there's very few players in the NHL like this player.
Okay.
Most elite players get long-term contracts. Colton Sissons has 5 years left on his deal. You know what? You can pencil him in. You know what you're getting from him, and his cap hit isn't ridiculous. You know, it's under $3 million. It's $2.8 million. And while the vast majority of my players were 1 or 2 year deals, I felt like having some continuity in your lineup can be a good thing. And you look at Vegas, some of the guys who stayed around the longest were guys in their bottom 6. So I'm taking Colton Sissons.
I had one of the front office executives that I went through the list with take Colton Sissons, but he's played 5 full National Hockey League seasons. He's broken the 10-goal mark once.
Oh, yeah.
And he signed for 5 years at almost $3 million. Those are the type of guys that crush you.
Okay.
All right. The New Jersey Devils. The Devils, there wasn't seemingly a lot to choose from here.
No, I went with... I think the Devils were my last team to fill out a spot. There's, you know what, some of the guys who you like as players, but their cap hit was too high, specifically on the back end. So I went with Nathan Bastian.
That's exactly who I went with, and that's who all 3 guys went with, which I was shocked because I know this is embarrassing to say for a reporter who covers this league so in depth. I didn't know anything about Nathan Bastian before today.
Fair point. I had to. I'll be honest. I looked at, like, I've heard his name, but I had to look up a lot of his stats, and he was the one who seemingly stood out amongst that group.
2 years on his contract at $714,000.
Yeah, it's not a big. You know what? There's a guy, Frank. We talked about that could be a player that maybe he's
bet on
your American League or he's battling out for your 12th, 13th, or 14th spot.
Yeah. So here's a guy, my guess from the New York Islanders, that won't be battling it out for one of those final spots. I have, and this is going to be interesting. I want to hear your take on it. I have Josh Bailey from the New York Islanders. Did you go with Eberle?
No, I went with Josh Bailey as well.
Okay.
But from conversations, people think stylistically that they think he fits in better and that their scouts are going to like him more. So I went with Josh Bailey.
Yeah. And he had a slightly better season, slightly lower cap hit. They both have the same term left on their deal, 3 years.
Yeah.
$5 million isn't crippling, I think, for what Josh Bailey brings. And I think he has, not to say that Jordan Eberle doesn't have it, because he at one point in his career did. I think Josh Bailey has a chance to give you slightly higher output in the future, higher ceiling, if that makes any sense.
Okay. For the New York Rangers, here's another younger player who I'm going with some upside and with some size. I'm taking Colin Blackwell.
Okay. When you said younger, I thought you were going to go with Julian Gauthier because he seems to be the popular pick. Really? Robert Cron and Ron Francis drafted him in Carolina. But I think Colin Blackwell is the guy, but he's not that young anymore. 28.
No, he's 20. What is he? 27 or 8?
He's 28. Yep.
Yeah.
So the Ottawa Senators, another team, not a lot to pick from. In fact, like I would say in talking to teams around the league as they were sizing up everyone's board, and I think the Sens were pretty active in trying to get a defenseman on Saturday before 3 p.m., that they were the team that had the least perspiration about their list.
Less than New Jersey?
I mean, at least in the same category or conversation. Okay. I mean, New Jersey, they did expose PK Subban. They did expose Andreas Janssen. Like, Ottawa doesn't, I don't know. They didn't have really the same conversations.
No, that's fair. I looked at, and I went with, and this is one that, because I just couldn't get a consensus anywhere from people I've talked to, and then even myself. So I went with the old coach kind of reliability. The problem is the cap hit makes no sense. It's a 1-year deal, but Chris Tierney is who I went with.
Chris Tierney, I think, is going to be the guy. I think that's a pretty good bet. Okay, that brings us to the Philadelphia Flyers, who are fascinating. I was very surprised that, and look, I knew their game plan going in was to be exposing some high-priced players. They're looking for cap flexibility, but once they made that trade over the weekend, Ryan Ellis for Nolan Patrick and Philip Myers, I thought for sure that when they opened up that extra protection spot, that meant they were going to protect James Van Riemsdyk. They instead ended up protecting Nick Aubé-Kubel. And it still doesn't make a ton of sense to me, given that you can kind of pencil James Van Riemsdyk in for 25 goals pretty much every season and still had a really good year last year and a down year for the Flyers. I think he's an attractive option for Seattle, but here's what I'll tell you from my intelligence is that I believe the Flyers are hard at work or have been hard at work in trying to get Seattle to take Jacob Voracek. I think there's a first round pick in play. Now, here's where it gets extra interesting is that there were rumblings over the weekend that the Flyers have some sort of deal or will have some sort of deal in place with the Kraken to get them to take Vladimir Tarasenko from St. Louis and flip him to Philly. I don't know what all that would cost. And I think that there may be a Robert Hagg selection involved here. So maybe they take Robert Hagg and they trade a first and Jacob Voracek to Seattle in exchange for Vladimir Tarasenko coming back the other way after the draft. But I think that's the word on the street at the moment.
All right, because JVR to me was just too good to pass up. And but it's funny, Frank, because I looked at well, I don't want to go out of turn here, but I have Tarasenko and I'm sounding like you do too. But I looked at it and said, there's certain guys that you need that can just score goals. And James Van Riemsdyk's a good offensive player. You know, like $7 million isn't ideal, but he's only got 2 years left on term. And like if I had to pick between James Van Riemsdyk right now and Voracek, I would take Van Riemsdyk right now. So
I think Jake Voracek is also going to be extremely motivated. You know, he still had 43 points in like 50 some games. Like he actually didn't, it wasn't a terrible season.
No, he bounced back.
And I think he's going to have a 60 to 70 point year next year. So you might have more points in Voracek than you do in Van Riemsdyk. And obviously you have the extra year of term, which is why the Flyers would need to sweeten the pot a little bit. But you mentioned goals, which is the perfect segue to my pick in Pittsburgh. I think it's going to be Jason Zucker for a lot of those same reasons. You know, I think there's some concern or curiosity whether they take Brandon Tanev. I think the extra years on the term don't really make a lot of sense. And Zucker, guaranteed 20 goals. Pencil him in, going to happen. 5.5, not crazy. Certainly better than Van Riemsdyk 7. I think Zucker is the guy.
See, my strategy here was they're taking Carey Price earlier. And they've realized that they don't want to burn Carey Price out in the regular season. You need a backup goalie that you like and you trust. So I went with Casey DeSmith.
Now, by the way, there seems to be some chatter that the Penguins are interested and could potentially move Tristan Jarry at some point once the expansion draft wraps. So let's keep an eye on that name as well.
That would, because I know that there was talking to people in Pittsburgh. That was one of the heavily debated ones because there's lots of people who think that DeSmith, they like him better than Tristan Jarry.
I think there's little evidence to suggest that DeSmith is better than Jarry at the moment.
Yeah. So I think DeSmith's kind of an underrated goaltender.
And I think the Penguins have been interested or potentially trying to move Marcus Pettersson. I think they tried to package him in a deal elsewhere on Saturday. That didn't end up working out. And I wonder if Marcus Pettersson is long in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
San Jose.
Well, I was kind of surprised that
I struggled with this one.
They're big dogs. I went with the defenseman just because I like depth on the blue line. He's under term. It's only $2.2 million. And I think Simic's a defenseman that, you know what, having watched a lot of the Sharks the last few seasons, they were very high on him. I think he had a little bit of a, sophomore slump, whatever you want to call it, last year, struggled. I think that guy's a prime target to bounce back. And he's one of my few players, Frank, that's there for a while. He's a younger defenseman. He's got good term at a low price at only 2.2.
Okay. I went with Matt Nieto. He kind of reminds me of like a Pierre-Edouard Bellemare light. If you're looking in terms of what Vegas, not big enough, but is spunky, scrappy, energy, consistent, shows up. Everyone knows what they're getting from him. And 2 years at the league minimum. Sign me up. That brings us to the St. Louis Blues. Who do you got? So you're taking Tarasenko like I am.
Yeah, I'm taking Tarasenko. How can you pass up Vladimir Tarasenko here for everything you just explained earlier, Frank? Yeah. Even if you don't want to keep him, the trade
he's so flippable because we know the
market is going to be there without question. And
we know the teams that are interested and have already stepped up to say we're willing to pay full freight. LA, New Jersey, Florida. There's been a bunch of teams, Carolina. They've all stepped up and said we're going to pay. We're willing to take him at his full cap hit. Like why a deal didn't get done, I really, for the life of me, I don't understand. And And I think in some ways the frustration has just boiled over there in St. Louis to the point where it's not fixable. It's the ship has sailed. It's just a matter of where's he going? How is he going? How is he getting there? And is St. Louis going to get anything in return for one of their best players over the last decade?
Well, how? Right? Like that's amazing to me that, and I get the shoulder surgery because I had, when that name came out, Frank, there were so many, I probably text 6 or 7 different NHL people and got responses back like, what? Right. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't believe it because there were, and I saw your report, Frank, that, many teams were interested. It just couldn't get the deal
I don't know why
wanted.
it couldn't get done. And then if that's the case, why didn't they just protect him, expose Barbashev, and make the deal after expansion? It was almost like they threw in the towel in this case and just said, we're washing our hands of this guy.
Yeah, like something's better than nothing for Vic.
I'm very surprised that's how the way it played out.
Yeah, like that's I can't wait till the whole story here comes out because something just.
No, that's that. I'm telling you, that's the whole story.
Yeah.
What I've written about the shoulder surgeries, not being captain, the way they questioned his commitment and intention on rehabbing after those shoulder surgeries that they botched. That's a pretty easy way for it to unravel. You question someone's character after your surgeon screwed that up. That's no bueno.
It basically came down to like 6 wrongs now. Like, so you erred on the thing. At some point, you just got to say as an organization, okay, you know what? This relationship is severed. It's not gonna repair itself. But now you can't just out of spite lose him for nothing, because that's got to be a massive. Players are competitive. They know who's good and who's not. And you just lost a guy who could easily score 30 goals next year, maybe 40. A 30-goal scorer. Like, he didn't walk away in free agency, Frank. He has 2 years left in his contract. Like, this decision is one that I think is going to haunt St. Louis. I've always talked about, franchise-altering decisions that take a long time to get over. And the best example I have is the New York Islanders and the Edmonton Oilers. You go back, you look at the Barzal-Beauvillier trade for Griffin Reinhart. Look where the Islanders have gone because of those two, and then look where the Oilers have gone. And that's with McDavid and Draisaitl, because it's still, you need depth. And if those 2 picks, and you don't even, I know the Oilers weren't taking Barzal, you could have picked any of the other 6 players there. Your team would be infinitely better. And the St. Louis Blues now get draft picks, get a prospect, something. You're getting absolutely nothing for one of the league's premier goal scorers.
Okay. So now, speaking of some premier players, got my popcorn ready. What are you doing in Tampa?
Man, this was the hardest decision because I believe that.
I think this is the easiest decision. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's the easy decision straight up if you want the best player. But
okay.
I wonder if, I've heard so much talk, and other people believe that Julien Brisebois is going to do everything he can to keep his guys intact. And Yanni Gourde, they love Yanni Gourde. They love him. You got, Palat's got 1 year, Killorn's got 2. Tyler Johnson isn't even close to those other 3 guys right now, as far as production goes. He's a good player, don't get me wrong. And I understand the local boy angle, but Yanni Gourde's the better player. He's feisty. You talked about that earlier, Frank, with other guys. He can produce for you. To me, it would be Yanni Gourde all day. I didn't want to outthink myself after talking to people. My only caveat is I wonder if Tampa decides to make a deal to ensure they don't take him.
I'd be surprised if that happens. So here's how I've thought about it in a totally different way. And so have the other teams that I've talked to. So they're saying that because everyone knows Tampa is in a cap crunch.
Okay. They're not going to help him and take Cal Foot?
The player, I heard Seattle doesn't like Cal Foot. Okay. The player is Matthew Joseph. Take Matthew Joseph, who a lot of people think can be Carter Verhaeghe, instant 20-goal guy next season, plays center, plays a 2-way game. Say, look, we're not helping you at all. We're taking a guy that makes peanuts.
Yeah, makes sense.
And if you want, you can give us one of those players for free in a side deal, and we'll take one of them, but we don't have to. Convince us otherwise. Because if not, I've said this before, you're doing Tampa an enormous favor. In any other offseason, without Seattle entering the league, they would be forced to give up a first-round pick to have someone take these guys, because no one's going to throw them a life raft, especially after 2 Stanley Cups, knowing the cap situation that they've been in. So the question is, if they do end up taking someone else with Matthew Joseph, who is it? And my guess is that it would be Andre Palat, and that they would then take Palat and flip him. Obviously, they could keep him. Right. Obviously, they could keep him and play him, but I think teams would be lining up to make a side deal with Seattle after the fact, or even right now, they could talk about it, is we'll take Palat off your hands in short order. Just tell us what you want.
Frank, your scenario makes a lot of sense, but you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me a little bit of how teams erred on the other side back in 2017, where they offered up, oh, you know what? Don't take this guy. We'll give you 2 players, Minnesota, Florida.
Well, this is the opposite of that. They're squeezing Tampa Bay's nuts.
That's what I'm saying. So but at the same time, Seattle is not getting, Yanni Gourde's a really good player. And they're just, you could get him.
He's a really good player, but he's got a cap hit for 4 more years and he's going to be 33.
Yeah, when it's done, but it's fine. Like, look at Florida's top 6 guys: Carlson, Marchessault, Riley. They're all still there 4 years later. It's only 4 years. It's not like it's 5 or 6. I think
if I were ranking players in terms of how I would perceive, at least from the conversations I've had, of how teams would rank them in perception in terms of how they'd want to acquire him, I think the order would be Palat, Killorn, Gourde, Johnson.
Oh, I don't argue with that because of the 2 and the 1 year contracts. Sure. And I thought about Palat, no question. And like, I know there's a lot of teams, the Edmonton Oilers would love Alex Killorn. They'd absolutely love to get Alex Killorn. He fits in exactly what they need. But when I look at, you can't turn over your entire roster, right? I like Yanni Gourde, but the Joseph makes sense, especially because I talked about that a few weeks ago. Do teams really want to go out of their way to help Tampa Bay? Because some teams are still annoyed, even though it wasn't illegal. Some teams.
No, it's not even that. It's just, you don't give anyone a leg up. You don't give anyone a get out of jail free card, even if it means you're getting a good player. Make them pay you to take the good player, which is what a lot of teams have forced other teams in cap trouble to do.
So what if Tampa says, okay, you take the guy that we want and you get Joseph?
That's the same way of doing it. It's just, we're talking about which guy actually goes on the sheet as the official selection. That's the same thing I was saying with Driedger and Vetrano. I have Driedger as my official selection, but Vetrano is going with him. For instance, if that's what ends up being the case, it all depends on who you want to choose as the official guy.
I just look at the makeup of Tampa Bay, and I think that when you move forward in that team, Yanni Gourde's the player if they're going to lose Coleman and Gaudreau, right? Yanni Gourde he's a very important part to that team.
There's no art. All those guys are. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of which one is getting pucked out. And I want to throw in one more thing, because I know at least 2 teams who had called the Tampa Bay Lightning over the weekend to try and make a deal before the trade freeze, and were told, we're not talking to anyone. Everyone's spidey senses are tingling. What does Tampa Bay have up their sleeve? Because other teams have tried to engage them in talks, and it's going nowhere. Nowhere. Right. So I am fascinated by Tampa Bay.
Who do you got out of Toronto?
So I think it's going to be Alex Kerfoot, but I think that Seattle is going to have to think long and hard about Jared McCann.
Yeah, see, I went because salary cap comes into play, and I've took some other big contracts. And you know what? You talked earlier about Joseph, and this guy I don't necessarily think has the finishing ability, but he reminds me of just how he skates, big body, he's cheap. Pierre Engvall.
I think you're way overthinking this. In fact, I would bet my house that it's one of either Kerfoot or McCann.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, right? Toronto
was literally, I would put it on wheels and drive it to Edmonton to give it to you, because I'm that confident that it's going to be.
So it's one of the 2. You're saying it's Kerfoot for sure over McCann?
I'm pretty sure that Seattle wanted Kerfoot and McCann, and they were not that happy when Pittsburgh traded McCann for nothing to Toronto, because they knew they were going to lose him for nothing.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. Well, Toronto probably won't be upset with that, even though I know Kerfoot produced for them in the postseason last year.
I think they'd actually, my guess is they're pretty happy having McCann, and that they wouldn't be that sad to lose Kerfoot by comparison.
Well, yeah, it's $3.5 million.
Well, McCann is 2.95, so it's not nothing. But he's also a year younger. And I think they think McCann is a center, which is interesting. What about the Vancouver Canucks?
Well, not a lot of options here, Frank. I didn't find anyway that jump out. So I went with looking at the division they play. I just went with an energy guy in Zach McEwen. He's dirt cheap. He's somebody that maybe can go up and down your NHL to the AHL potentially. There wasn't a lot of players here that jumped off the page for me. And to be honest, in the conversations I had, I never got any sort of pick that made me change my mind.
So one team picked Matthew Highmore, two others picked Cole Lind, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Remember, I was saying there's going to be one team that it makes sense to have a prospect bet on. Cole Lind's numbers in the AHL are pretty good. Again, not a whole lot here to pick from. Might as well take a flyer.
Yeah, that's fair.
The Washington Capitals.
Well, this is another one where I went. Now the challenge here is he doesn't have he's not waiver eligible. So waiver exempt. But goaltending, man, in the NHL is so difficult, and
pretty hard to give up Vitek Vanacek.
Yes.
He doesn't need waiver exemption because he's like, if you have Dreger, I think it's him and Dreger that are your two guys, and you have Kakinen that's going back and forth. Those are my three goalies.
All right. So we agree there.
So not a lot of money spent on goalies, but I think can give you just as good, sort of 1A, 1B as sort of anywhere in the league in terms of that next rung down from the elite guys. So it was interesting in Washington. The one guy that made me think was Brendan Dillon. Some people are wondering if his best days are behind him. 3 years left on his contract. Yeah. God, that guy is loved everywhere he's gone. Like I'm telling you, players want to play with him. They think he makes their team better. He's an awesome guy in the locker room. Brendan Dillon is one guy that gave me pause, but Vitek Vanacek, man, that is a tough one to pass up.
Yeah. You know, very quietly, who had a really good season in Washington, Frank, and was very good in the playoffs again, who's dirt cheap, was Garnet Hathaway. He was really good for a while. You go look at his numbers in Washington this season, right? Like I know people in Calgary, when they got rid of him, were just like, oh, whatever. There's a guy who's just a little bit late developer. You can't pass up the goaltender, but you watch him in the next few years. I think he's a guy that's slowly just going to be a really good complementary depth player for your team.
I think that's fair, but I still think it's Vitek Vanacek.
Yeah, I would agree too. It's just too hard to pass up for a guy.
I agree. So last but not least is the Winnipeg Jets.
Well, here's another one who.
This is a slam dunk, I think.
Dylan DeMello?
No. Wow. I think it's Mason Appleton, and I think it's I think Dylan DeMello was there. Like he's like that piece of meat for a dog to throw you off the scent.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I think they tried so hard to move Mason Appleton and couldn't get the value that they felt like they needed. And with Dylan DeMello, he's that sort of sneaky good right shot defenseman that isn't flashy, not sexy. He's not going to give you a ton of points, but just kind of there and does his job well and is consistent and doesn't make the home run mistake. But I just think with the term that's left on that deal, 3 more years, I think it is.
Yep.
3 more years on Dylan DeMello. Mason Appleton, man, plug that guy right into your middle six. 12 goals last year in 56 games, 25 points. I think he's ready to break out and be that sort of 25-goal guy with the right teammates and the right minutes. I think he can be so much better. And he finally, for a Winnipeg team that was waiting for him to break through that ceiling, just unfortunately did it in the 1 year where there was expansion and they couldn't keep him because they wanted to keep Kopp and Lowry together. So for me, it's Mason Appleton all day long.
So what was your cap hit? Because that was the one thing when I was done that I didn't like about my team.
So my cap hit was exactly, so there's a bunch of different layers to this. You need to select at least 48.9.
Yes.
So my selection ended up being 65.6. But when you look at the number of guys that are UFAs and RFAs that I selected, their real cap hit is around 53. So that leaves you $27 million in cap space. And by the way, that includes...
Does that include Dougie Hamilton?
No, it includes Vladimir Tarasenko. I made Jake Bean as the official selection from Carolina. Like I said,
but they're double dip. Sign Hamilton.
Take the guy and then also sign Dougie Hamilton. So, like I said, none of these things are guaranteed. These are all just projections as to what the sort of conversation is around the league. If we were to be making some wagers here.
Yeah, like I look at the reason why I don't think my team is overly realistic at the end. Well, the carry price changes everything because it's $10 million, right? So that bumps my cap into the low 70s, which probably might not be a selling feature. But I also picked some players knowing that they would get traded right away. So I took that as part of it to say, hey, your cap, because technically Seattle's cap hit could be, upwards of 80 million if they want it. Because
I think it'll be in the high 70s.
Yeah. So that's
but it's all, but the key
number,
is,
and
you hit this right on the head though. The key is I only have 1, 2, 3. I have 7 guys that go into a second year of their contract.
Yeah, I have 11.
That's it. 7. Yeah. They have the ultimate flexibility moving forward. I think they're going to be decent. Let's see the other signings they make. I think there's a lot of other guys that they're interested in talking to that are UFAs that they're going to get a real good sense about during this exclusive negotiating period. And I think the key is flexibility moving forward.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating, Frank, because what I found, and I'm sure you did, and the people I've talked to, everybody has a different opinion on certain players. And I'm sure Seattle's the exact same thing right now. Seattle, obviously the main tough one is going to be carry price, as we alluded to. Do you turn down a future Hall of Fame goaltender who potentially claims now he has injuries, and no one knows, like they'll talk to the,
maybe he does. He's 34 years old and has played a ton of games. Like I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not discounting that he might, but what if you don't take carry price, Frank? And he sits out a year and then he just lights it up for the next few seasons. That's the risk of not taking.
What if you take carry price, he sits out the year and then he never plays again?
Yeah, well,
you've got $44 million that you're paying out, and I'm sure the contract would be insured, all those things.
Yeah.
You could use the LTIR space. And some people would make the argument, look, you just spent $650 million on your expansion fee. You spent, what did the arena cost? $1.1 billion in private financing.
Yeah, what's an extra 40?
What's an extra 44? I get it. But at the same time, is that the best way to build your team moving forward? Or if you're getting regular season carry price from the last number of years, who wasn't all world before this deep playoff run, that's making everyone think twice. If he didn't go to the Cup final this year, we're literally not having this conversation. They expose carry price and you just go, meh, like whatever. If he's the regular season carry price, are you better off just spending a few $1 million on Chris Driedger, Vitek Vanacek, and Capo Kakinen, getting a reasonable facsimile of the production of that goaltending, and then having flexibility to move forward and spend your money in different places, like on your blue line or like putting goals in the net?
That's fascinating. Now, before we let you go, Frank, there was only 2 UFAs who were protected.
3.
By the 3. Well, the 2 goaltenders, Allmark
Grubauer,
and Buffalo. And I know
Allmark, and also Yoel Armia from Montreal.
Okay. So when you look though at like Grubauer in Colorado, I could see a legitimate chance of him resigning there. Allmark in Buffalo, like, what are you hearing?
I think things have been, I think it's gone off the rails a little bit with Grubauer as well. I think there's a chance maybe, but I mentioned last week that they're interested in Kemper as well. I don't think it's a done deal that Grubauer is coming back.
Yeah.
But okay. Allmark, by the way, with Buffalo, so we started heading down that path. What were they doing? How did they not go out and get a goaltender? Oh, you look at all these guys available, whether it's Vanacek, whether it is Driedger, whether it's someone else. You protected a guy that almost everyone knows is not coming back to Buffalo, and you had nothing else to expose. Yeah. You had a free spot. It was a free spot on your bingo card that you didn't fill in.
Yeah.
That to me, with so many goalies available, that's a tough one to explain. I don't know how you explain that one.
Well, Frank, that one will rank up there, I think, a little bit. Not as much, but with the exposing of Tarasenko decision, I think those are ones that are going to be talked about because for quite some time. You're right. Like,
but at least with Tarasenko, you go, this thing's soured. He's never playing here again, and we're not paying him $15 million. Like, what's your excuse for Allmark?
No. Well, you're fair, but look, you even said, and people I talked to, and you're more connected than I am, Frank, who said flat out, we were seriously interested in. Now, I know that interested and willing to give what St. Louis wants, but if St. Louis was at the point where we're like, well, we're just going to walk away from him for nothing, how bad were the offers that you got that you wouldn't take one of those rather than lose them for nothing? That's
Jonathan Quick was exposed. He's from the Northeast. He's from Connecticut. Like, why were you not trying to make a deal to get Jonathan Quick if you're Buffalo? I'm just there's a million examples, whether it was Aiden Hill in Arizona, who went to San Jose, you know, whether it's trying to get Ben Bishop on the cheap, who waived his no move from Dallas. Like, Jonathan Bernier is a free agent, trade for his rights and negotiate. Like, none of these moves would have cost anything to do.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Frank. That's why as much as I'm excited about the expansion draft, I'm really kind of excited about the ripple effect of the expansion draft as far as the other trades that will come from it.
Baby.
Then into the draft.
Saturday was like a mini trade deadline at 3 p.m.
Yeah, it was fun. And this, as we've said it all along. And I know you talked about it, the Captain Chaos, that this will be one of the more interesting off seasons in NHL history. And
we still got buyouts. Teams were like, why would I buy a guy out when I don't know if Seattle's going to take him?
Yeah.
Or if I could work out a side deal.
I think we'll see some buyouts between the 22nd and
James
the 27th.
Neal, surprised that hasn't happened yet. But again, there's been no reason to have it happen.
No, there's none. Like, you never.
Can you get someone to take Koskinen?
They're trying. I've heard there's been some slight interest, but again, I just don't think how serious it is, because when the goalie market's available, you know, you acquire Koskinen, and even if Edmonton retains 50%, it's still $2.25 million. And there's lots of goalies I think you can sign him for agency for less than that.
Yep, 100%.
Well, Frank, this is a fun one.
This is one of our longest pods ever, but so worth it.
Well, everybody send in, feel free. We'll put up ours. Everybody can put out their team list. It's a lot of fun to go through the process of your expansion draft. Good luck with that. And we'll have a special entry draft podcast coming up on Friday with the draft expert. We'll do it the morning of the draft because we don't know who teams are going to take. So we're going to focus on the players and what they offer. So then fans can go and listen to that podcast. Oh, our team just took this guy. Here we go. So we're going to have a lot of in-depth analysis from some amateur sport experts coming up on Friday.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Seravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.